Hello and welcome back, and as we close out the month of August, here's an election prediction to see where both candidates stand. And since we're just a few months away from this upcoming election, every news story is increasingly important as they will remain on people's minds, perhaps even to election day. As you know, a lot of things get released towards election day, especially in October. They're known as October surprises because people's memories are extremely short, and if something is released right before the election, that might affect someone's vote. On the other hand, if something is released 6 months before an election, it's not really going to matter. But with that being said, the news stories now will especially matter, and as we go forward, they will increasingly matter. But without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe in order to join the 12%. Thank you for supporting the channel, and now to the first piece of news. So the first piece of news is actually about the future Harris versus Trump debate. And in this debate, there may or may not be muted mics. So basically, the rules have it so that there will be muted mics, but the Harris team wants the Trump team to basically diss the muted mics and just have hot mics. And this is because the Harris team thinks that if Donald Trump is on a hot mic, he will say something stupid, which will cause people to vote for Harris. If you remember in the Biden debate, there were not hot mics, and Trump did perform significantly better than he did in 2020 when there were hot mics. Trump himself does want hot mics as he does not want to portray weakness, but his team does not want hot mics. But hot mics are a double-edged sword for Donald Trump because while he can say something that will affect voters' opinions of him in a negative light, we remember back in 2016, hot mics actually worked in his benefit, especially regarding the line he said to Hillary Clinton when he said, "'cause you'd be in jail." So it's a double-edged sword. They may help Trump, they may hurt Trump, but it seems like as of right now, there will be muted mics when the other candidate is speaking. So this is important to note for the future debate. Now we get to one of Harris's main criticisms, which is the fact that she hasn't really sat down for an interview in quite some time, particularly when she's running for president. But now it seems like her and her VP candidate, Tim Walz, will both sit down for an interview. And many view that it is actually hard to interview Harris because of her background as a prosecutor. She makes interviewers feel like they are on trial. And the New York Times says that basically it is challenging to interview Harris. And they also say that this interview will be high stakes, which I agree with because this will essentially be her first chance at interviewing on the presidential trail, and first impressions are ever so important. If she slips up on her policy or she says something like she had a line in one of her campaign ads that people did not like about tuna sandwiches or something really stupid, but that didn't really matter. But if she says something stupid here, that may affect people because everyone already has a preconceived opinion on Donald Trump, but not everyone has an opinion on Harris just yet. So this interview is much more important than many Donald Trump interviews are. We'll also see Tim Walz, and we'll see if the hype surrounding him from the media is actually real, or is the media just making him seem better than he is, or is the media even making him seem worse than he is? We'll see how Tim Walz is as a candidate and also as a person in this interview. Between the time of recording and editing, the TV interview actually happened, and there's an update from the New York Times. According to opinion columnist Brett Stevens, Harris didn't hurt herself in her interview, but she didn't help herself either. She was warm and relatable, but she didn't really cover many policy issues, and she usually would just avoid them, which is what people wanted from this interview because many of her policy issues have not been defined yet, so this interview was a way for her to define her policies and essentially come up with her major platform. But since she didn't give straight answers, she didn't solve many of the concerns that people had and many of the reasons people actually wanted this interview. Secondly, Walz's appearance in the interview didn't actually help Harris. Walz was evasive in important questions about his misstatement about military service, false claims about a DUI arrest, and misleading statements about his family's fertility treatments. So it does seem like he's not very good at responding to his missteps in politics, which can serve as a problem in the future. If we see more evasive interviews like this, people will eventually get tired of this and may just start to support Donald Trump. Moreover, it does seem like, according to this New York Times columnist, The reporter didn't really give tough questions to Harris or Walz, and it wasn't similar to what we've seen from the reporter in the past. So that's the update to Harris and Tim Walz's interview. But now that that's covered, without further ado, let's go on to the election prediction between Kamala Harris, the current vice president, and Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States. As always, we give Harris her safe states, which include the West Coast as well as most of the East Coast. And why do I say most? Well, it's because some states on the East Coast, like Maine, New Hampshire, and North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, will not solidly go to Harris, neither will the state of Virginia. And in the Northeast, Pennsylvania will not solidly go to Harris either, even though it did go to Biden back in the 2020 election. In the Midwest, Harris safely picks up Illinois, but that is the end of her safe states. On the other hand, Trump picks up many more safe states, but his safe states have far less electoral votes each than Harris's safe states. For example, he picks up Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Alaska towards the west. Then he picks up North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Nebraska's first, Nebraska's third, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, and West Virginia from west to east. Now, some of these other states are not in contention but won't go to their respective candidate by a crazy margin like the states that are already filled out. For example, Iowa and Ohio will both go to Donald Trump, but not by the margins that like Wyoming or North Dakota will go to Trump by. We saw Iowa went to Trump by 8 in 2020, and Ohio also went to Trump by 8 in 2020. Now that Vance is picked, it does seem like Ohio will go to Trump by maybe 10 percentage points or 11, but not by like 15 plus percent, and Iowa will have a similar phenomenon. On the other hand, Harris will pick up Minnesota with probably about an 8% lead over Donald Trump, especially since her VP pick Tim Walz is from Minnesota. Trump will also pick up Maine second, whereas Harris will pick up Colorado and New Mexico, both states that Biden won back in 2020 by over 10 percentage points, but are going to narrow up in 2024. Trump will also win the state of Texas, which he has won in the past. In fact, he won it by almost 6 in 2020, and polls in 2024 are not promising for Harris in Texas. While Harris does lead in terms of the national popular vote, it does seem like states such as Texas, Iowa, Ohio, etc. will go to Donald Trump by pretty solid margins. Because remember, the popular vote does not matter too much, the Electoral College is what matters. In fact, in 2016, when Donald Trump won by a significant margin, he actually lost the popular vote to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Now that that's settled, we will go to our next states, which I view have a pretty similar chance of voting for their respective candidate, with Virginia likely going to Harris and Florida likely going to Donald Trump. I actually think both states will be somewhat close, but not close enough that they are toss up states. In fact, Florida went to Trump by a larger margin in 2020 than in 2016, and Virginia went to Biden by over 10 in 2020. Virginia is polling towards Harris by a pretty significant margin, 3 percentage points, that is about the margin of error. These polls that have Trump in the lead were from too long ago to make a judgment. Whereas in the state of Florida, Donald Trump leads by a similar amount that surpasses the margin of error. So both states will go to their respective candidates, with Virginia going to Harris and Florida going to Trump. So now we head over to the Northeast, where New Hampshire will go to Harris, and so will Maine. The Northeast typically votes for Democrats. In fact, the entirety of the Northeast voted for Biden, with the sole exception of Maine's 2nd District back in 2020. And in 2016, there was a somewhat similar story, with the only defectors being Maine's 2nd as well as Pennsylvania. In any case, New Hampshire and Maine will go to Harris, as they are in the polls and have gone to Democrats historically. New Hampshire's going to Harris by about 5 in this recent poll, and as much as about 7. Maine tells a similar story. It is slightly less close, where Harris is leading by actually 5 in these recent polls, but most polls do have Harris in the lead in Maine by significant amounts. So currently, Harris leads by 6 electoral votes over Donald Trump, but it is anyone's game, as 94 votes remain. The next state we go to is Michigan, which will go to Kamala Harris. Michigan will go to Harris pretty significantly, especially for Michigan, because remember, Michigan barely went to Biden and it went to Donald Trump in 2016. But in 2024, particularly with the conflict in Gaza, Michigan is shifting more left. As we saw, it is going to Harris by as much as 4 in this recent poll. One poll does have it as even, but most polls do have Harris in the lead. The betting markets also have Harris in the lead with about a 61% chance at Michigan. However, Trump makes the election closer by picking up North Carolina. North Carolina is one of the closest states historically, going to Obama back against McCain, but now it goes Republican ever since Romney picked it up, and then Donald Trump won it twice in a row. Even at Trump's height of his unpopularity, he still won North Carolina by over a percentage point, and he will likely win it yet again in 2024, as he is leading in practically every recent poll. The betting markets tell a similar story where Donald Trump has a 61% chance at North Carolina, which echoes Harris's chance at Michigan, with her having a 61% chance at Michigan. So now we go to our next state, which is Georgia. Georgia is a state that barely went to Biden in 2020, went to Trump in 2016. You'll see me say this with a lot of states. Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania all followed this pattern, and so did Arizona. So you'll see this a lot. And Georgia is a similar story, except it had a whopping 5-point shift between 2016 and 2020. It seems like it is shifting back in 2024 to Trump's court. While Harris does lead in a few recent polls, almost every other poll does have Trump in the lead. If we also look at the betting markets, Trump is leading in Georgia. Even though he has lost some of his lead, he still maintains a lead in the state of Georgia. Georgia is a southern state, and southern states usually will vote Republican, and it seems like this election will be no different. Georgia will be a tilt state in this election, but it'll still go to Donald Trump, bringing him up to 251. However, Harris is not out of this election just yet. She picks up Nebraska second, as well as Wisconsin. Wisconsin may very well be the closest state in this election. It barely went to Biden, barely went to Trump, and it does seem like it will barely go to Harris in 2024. Polls in Wisconsin were at one point pretty promising for Donald Trump, but now they seem to be going to Harris in almost every case. So it does seem like RFK Jr. dropping out may have helped Trump in the state of Wisconsin, but otherwise Harris is picking up Wisconsin, and the betting markets say that Harris will win in Wisconsin. So now it's a tied election, and whoever wins Pennsylvania wins this election. Nevada and Arizona don't quite matter at this point because the state of Pennsylvania will be the deciding factor with its 19 electoral votes. But in case something different happens across the rest of the board, I'm just going to go over Nevada and Arizona regardless. So we'll start with Nevada. Nevada has a higher chance of going to Harris. It is essentially a coin flip in this election. Polls in Nevada are mostly going to Kamala Harris in this election, but at one point they were going to Donald Trump. I will give Nevada as a tilt to Kamala Harris, even though I do think it will very slightly go to Donald Trump. I do have to look at these polls, which do say that Harris will win in Nevada. But one important thing to note is that Harris's polls are inflated, because after each convention, each respective convention, polling numbers are inflated. After the RNC, Trump's numbers were inflated, and now after the DNC, Harris's numbers are inflated. So we do have to take these polls with a grain of salt, and if anything, in the coming weeks, Trump will gain some ground on Harris. In fact, what many call the Harris honeymoon, so to speak, I think is over. I think Harris's numbers will start to reach a normalcy. The polling bump she had since Biden dropped out is pretty tough to do, and I don't think that she can continue that. So I think, if anything, Trump is just going to increase his numbers over the next few weeks, meaning that Trump will be the most likely candidate to win the presidency. But as of right now, stay tuned for Arizona and Pennsylvania to see who will win this election. So now we get to Arizona, which is a state that Republicans used to win somewhat solidly, especially when McCain was running. But now it does seem like Democrats have been getting more and more popular in Arizona, even flipping it back in 2020, as well as in the governor race between Carrie Lake and Katie Hobbs. In the state of Arizona, it does seem like Republicans will regain their lead, getting the 11 electoral votes, bringing Trump 8 away from victory and Harris 13. So Pennsylvania is the most important state as of right now, it seems like. With regard to Arizona, Trump is leading in most major polls, especially according to this poll from Emerson College. And as we can see, since RFK Jr. dropped out, there is a significant, noticeable shift towards Donald Trump. We saw Trump was leading by +1 in this poll that included RFK Jr., but now he's leading by +4. But with that being said, Trump wins Arizona, bringing him to 262 electoral votes. And finally, we get to Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral votes, and it will be the deciding factor in this election, and it will determine who will win between Trump and Harris. Pennsylvania did go to Biden back in 2020, but it went to Trump back in 2016, and typically went Democrat before that. 2016 was a shocker in the state of Pennsylvania, but it does seem like, for the most part, Pennsylvania does go to the Democrats. However, in 2024, Trump is leading in most major polls in Pennsylvania. These polls are partisan, so we have to take them with a grain of salt, but most of the time, Trump is winning in these polls, and it does seem like he's also leading in the betting markets at essentially a coin flip. So this election right now does seem like a coin flip, but Trump is leading very narrowly in Pennsylvania, winning 281 to 257 against Kamala Harris. So if you want more of these, make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.